All right, so picture this. It's 1836, and you're standing in the middle of what's now Illinois, except it doesn't look like farmland. Not yet. It looks like an ocean of grass stretching out in all directions, taller than a man on horseback, roots tangled so thick you could practically walk on them without touching soil. The prairie. And you're a farmer. You've come west with your family, your tools, your dreams of good land and better crops. You've heard the stories, right? Soil so rich it's practically black. Earth so deep you could grow anything. The kind of land that back east would make you wealthy. So you take your plow, the same cast iron plow that worked perfectly fine in Vermont or Pennsylvania, and you drive it into that prairie sod, and it sticks. The soil, see, it's not just rich, it's sticky, it's thick. It's got this clay content that turns into something like wet cement when you disturb it. Your plow cuts in maybe 6 inches, and then the soil just clings to the blade, packs itself tight against the moldboard. Within minutes, you're not plowing anymore. You're just dragging a 100-pound clump of mud through the grass. Every few feet, you have to stop, scrape the blade clean with a paddle, start again, stop again, scrape again. What should take an hour takes all day. What should take a day takes a week. And at the end of it, you've barely turned an acre. Farmers were abandoning their claims, packing up, heading back east, telling everyone the prairie was impossible. Too rich, if you can believe that. The soil was so good, it defeated the very tools designed to work it. This was the crisis. Not drought, not locusts, not even the distance from markets or the harsh winters. The prairie itself, that legendary fertile ground everyone dreamed about, was rejecting the plow. Now, 1837, a blacksmith shop in Grand Deturn, Illinois. The man's name is John Deere. He's 33 years old, and he's basically broke. He'd come west from Vermont the year before, set up shop, and discovered something frustrating. There weren't that many people out here yet, not enough to keep a blacksmith busy with horseshoes and wagon repairs. But Deere kept hearing the same complaint, over and over, from every farmer who wandered into his shop. The plows don't work. The soil sticks. We can't break the prairie. And Deere, he's watching these farmers, and he's thinking about the problem the way a blacksmith thinks. Not like a farmer, not like an agricultural theorist, like someone who understands metal, who understands friction and surface, and how different materials behave under stress. See, cast iron plows, the ones everyone was using, they had a rough surface, microscopically rough, and that sticky prairie loam would grab onto every tiny imperfection, building up layer after layer until the whole blade was useless. Deere had seen something in his shop that gave him an idea, a broken saw blade, steel from an old sawmill, smooth, almost mirror bright, and he thought, what if he took that saw blade, heated it in his forge, and shaped it not into a flat blade like the cast iron plows, but into a curve, a gentle, swooping curve that would not just cut the soil, but turn it, lift it, roll it over. The shape mattered. The curve would create a scouring action, the soil sliding along the blade and polishing it even smoother as it worked. But here's the real genius, the thing that separated this from just another plow experiment. Deere understood that steel, real steel, was smoother than cast iron, denser, less porous. The prairie soil wouldn't have anything to grab onto. It would just slide off. He made his first plow in 1837, one plow, built himself, probably worked half the night getting the curve just right, the edge sharp enough, the whole thing balanced so it would actually cut true when pulled by a team of oxen. And then he took it to a farmer, guy named Lewis Crandall, and Crandall hitched it up, drove it into that sticky black prairie sod, and it worked. The soil curled off the blade like a ribbon, clean, smooth, no stopping, no scraping, just continuous, steady plowing, the kind of plowing that made sense, the kind that could actually turn the prairie into farmland. Word spread fast.
By 1838, Deere was making 10 plows a year. By 1841, he was making 75. And by 1843, he'd moved his entire operation to Moline, Illinois, right on the Mississippi River, where he could get better steel shipped in from Pittsburgh and ship finished plows out to farmers across the expanding frontier. But here's what's interesting. Deere didn't invent the steel plow. Other blacksmiths had experimented with steel. John Lane in Chicago had made steel plows. So had a few others. But Deere did something none of them managed. He made it work, consistently, reliably, and then, critically, he figured out how to make it in volume. That shift from one-off custom blacksmith work to actual manufacturing, that's where the story really gets interesting. Because making one perfect plow in your shop is one thing. Making 1,000 identical plows that all work exactly the same way, that's something else entirely.
So Deere's moved to Moline, right? And he's facing a new problem. A better problem, sure, but still a problem. He's got more orders than he can fill. Farmers are literally waiting months for plows, and he's trying to scale up production, but he's running into the limits of what a blacksmith shop can do. The steel he needs, high-quality crucible steel, it's coming from Pittsburgh, shipped down the Ohio River, up the Mississippi, expensive, slow, and there's not always enough of it. The steel mills back east, they're not used to making the specific grades and shapes that plow manufacturing requires. They're making steel for railroads, for bridges, for industrial machinery. Plow steel is almost an afterthought. Deere starts working directly with the steel mills, specifying exactly what he needs: thickness, hardness, surface finish. He's basically training an entire supply chain to support this one product. And in the process, he's standardizing things, making sure that every sheet of steel that comes into his factory meets the same specifications, so every plow that comes out works the same way. This is 1840s, 1850s, remember. Mass production is still a relatively new idea. Most manufacturing is still craft-based. Every rifle is hand-fitted. Every clock is individually assembled. The idea of interchangeable parts, of true standardization, that's still radical. But Deere's pushing toward it because he has to. If a farmer in Iowa buys a John Deere plow and then a farmer in Kansas buys one, they need to be identical. Same performance, same durability. The Kansas farmer can't get a worse plow just because it was made on a Tuesday instead of a Friday. And the competition is heating up. By the 1850s, there are dozens of plow manufacturers in the Midwest. Some of them are making good plows. Some of them are making cheap copies of Deere's design. And Deere's having to figure out how to differentiate his product in a market that's getting crowded. Part of his answer is quality. Obsessive, almost fanatical quality control. Every plow that leaves the Moline factory has to meet his standards, or it doesn't ship. He'd rather lose a sale than damage his reputation. But the other part, and this is smart, is innovation. Deere doesn't just make one plow. He makes plows for different soil types, different crop types, different farming operations. Breaking plows for virgin prairie, stirring plows for established fields, cultivating plows for row crops. By 1857, he's producing 10,000 plows a year. 10,000! That's more plows than most blacksmiths would make in a lifetime, coming out of one factory in 1 year. And the impact on Midwestern agriculture it's hard to overstate. Farms that were struggling to plow 10 acres can now plow 50. Farmers who were spending days breaking sod can do it in hours. The efficiency gain is massive. Which means something else starts happening. Settlement accelerates. Between 1850 and 1860, the population of Illinois more than doubles. Iowa's population triples. Land that was considered marginal, too difficult to farm, suddenly becomes valuable. Towns spring up. Railroads push west to connect these new farming communities to markets in Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City. The Prairie, that ocean of grass that defeated cast-iron plows, is being transformed into the breadbasket of America, and it's happening because of steel, because of that smooth, self-scouring surface that lets farmers actually work the soil. But there's a darker side to this story that doesn't always get told. The prairie ecosystem, that thick mat of native grasses and wildflowers that had existed for thousands of years, it's being destroyed, plowed under, turned into farmland.
The bison that depended on it, gone. The Native American communities who lived on the prairie, displaced. The entire ecological and human landscape of the Midwest is being rewritten, and the steel plow is one of the primary tools making it happen. Deere himself probably didn't think much about this. He was solving a problem, making a tool that worked, building a business. But the consequences of his innovation extended far beyond individual farms. By the time the Civil War starts in 1861, Midwestern farms are producing enough grain to feed not just themselves, but the Union Army. And that agricultural capacity, that ability to produce massive food surpluses, it's a strategic advantage. The Confederacy can't match it. After the war, production explodes even further. The Homestead Act is bringing thousands of new settlers west. They all need plows. John Deere and Company, it's now one of the largest industrial operations in the Midwest. Hundreds of employees, multiple factory buildings, a network of dealers and distributors across the expanding frontier. And Deere himself, he's wealthy now, respected, a pillar of the community in Moline. But he's also, interestingly, stepping back from day-to-day operations. His son, Charles Deere, is taking over more of the business management. The company is transitioning from a founder-led operation to something more institutional, more permanent. Which raises an interesting question. What happens when the inventor steps away? When the blacksmith who shaped steel by hand and feel has to trust engineers and managers to maintain quality? Can the company keep innovating? Can it stay ahead of the competition?
So by the 1880s, John Deere's original plow design has been refined, improved, and adapted into probably 50 different models. There's the Hawkeye riding plow, the Gilpin sulky plow, the New Departure cultivator. The company's catalog reads like an agricultural encyclopedia. And the technology keeps advancing. The original walking plow, where the farmer literally walks behind the blade guiding it by hand, that's being replaced by riding plows. The farmer sits on a steel seat mounted on the plow frame, using levers to adjust depth and angle. It's less exhausting, more precise, faster. Steel quality keeps improving too. By the 1890s, American steel mills are producing material that would have seemed impossible 50 years earlier. Uniform composition, consistent hardness, surface finishes so smooth they're almost glass-like. And John Deere and Company is right there, working with the mills, specifying exactly what's needed for agricultural implements. But here's something interesting. The company's success creates a weird problem. Farmers are buying John Deere plows because they last. These aren't disposable tools. A well-maintained steel plow could work for 20, 30 years, which means your customer buys once and doesn't come back. So the company has to keep expanding into new markets, new farmers, new regions, the Great Plains, the Dakotas, Montana. Anywhere the prairie needs breaking, John Deere is there, with plows designed specifically for local soil conditions. And they're innovating in other ways, not just plows. Cultivators for row crops, harrows for breaking up clods, planters, hay equipment. The company's becoming a full-line agricultural equipment manufacturer. If you're farming the Midwest, John Deere probably makes something you need. Charles Deere, John's son, he's the driving force behind this expansion, and he's got a different approach than his father. John Deere was an inventor, a craftsman. Charles is a businessman. He's thinking about distribution networks, dealer relationships, brand recognition. He's turning the company into a modern corporation. Which brings us to the 1890s and a new kind of competition. Not just other plow makers, steam power, gasoline engines, the possibility of mechanizing not just the plow itself, but the power pulling it. Some companies are already experimenting with steam traction engines that can pull multiple plow bottoms at once. Massive machines, intimidating, powerful, but also complex and expensive. John Deere and Company is watching this development carefully. Do they get into the tractor business or stick with horse-drawn implements? For now, they're sticking with horses. The reasoning is sound. Tractors are expensive. Most farmers can't afford them. Horses are proven technology, reliable, and the steel plow works just fine behind a horse team. But there's a tension here, an awareness that the industry is changing, that mechanization is coming whether they embrace it or not. Meanwhile, the Midwestern landscape keeps transforming. By 1900, virtually all of the prairie is plowed. What was once an ecosystem is now a patchwork of farms: corn, wheat, oats, soybeans. The agricultural productivity is staggering.
The Midwest is feeding America and exporting surplus grain overseas. And John Deere plows turned millions of acres of that prairie. It's not an exaggeration to say that the steel plow enabled Midwestern agriculture as we know it. Without that self-scouring blade, the settlement pattern would have been different, slower, more concentrated in areas with lighter soil. The human cost of this transformation doesn't show up in company histories or agricultural statistics. Native communities who were displaced, prairie ecosystems that were destroyed. The fact that we now call this region the Corn Belt or the Wheat Belt, as if that's what it always was, erases what it used to be. There's no simple moral here. The steel plow was a tool. It solved a real problem for farmers trying to make a living on difficult land. But tools have consequences. Technologies shape landscapes, shape societies, shape who benefits and who loses. John Deere himself died in 1886 at age 82. By then, his company was a major industrial operation, employing hundreds of people, producing tens of thousands of implements every year. His name was literally stamped on plows from Minnesota to Texas. But the company didn't stop with his death. Charles Deere kept building, kept expanding, and by the early 1900s, John Deere and Company was one of the dominant agricultural equipment manufacturers in America. The steel plow was still the foundation product, still the thing that made everything else possible. But the company was evolving, preparing for whatever came next. Gasoline tractors, combines, industrialized agriculture on a scale John Deere couldn't have imagined when he was shaping that first plow in his Grand Detour smith shop.
Now, we need to talk about what the steel plow actually meant for farming as a practice. Because it's one thing to say it made plowing easier, it's another to understand how that changed everything else. Before the steel plow, a farmer with a cast iron plow and a team of oxen could maybe plow an acre a day in prairie soil. And that's working from dawn to dusk, stopping constantly to scrape the blade, wearing themselves and the animals out. With the steel plow, the same farmer, same animals, could plow 3 to 5 acres a day, some days more if conditions were right. That's not a minor improvement, that's transformative. Which means a family that could previously farm maybe 40 acres can now farm 160, a quarter section as they called it under the Homestead Act. And 160 acres of good Midwestern soil planted in wheat or corn that could actually support a family, generate surplus to sell, build wealth. So farm sizes increase, operations scale up, and this creates a feedback loop. Bigger farms need more equipment, more plows, more harrows, more planters, which drives demand for manufacturing, which creates jobs in places like Moline, which attracts more workers, which builds more towns. The economic geography of the Midwest is being shaped by agricultural productivity, and that productivity is being enabled by the steel plow. But there's a labor aspect here that's crucial. Plowing is back-breaking work. Exhausting work, the kind of work that wears people down. Anything that makes it less physically demanding, that's not just a convenience, it's a quality of life improvement. When you go from stopping every 10 feet to scrape your plow to running continuous furrows across an entire field, you're not just saving time, you're preserving your body, your back, your hands. You're able to work longer years, maintain productivity into older age. And this matters because Midwestern farms were often family operations, father and sons, multiple generations. When the work becomes more efficient, everyone benefits. Though it's worth noting, this efficiency also changes labor dynamics. When one person with good equipment can do the work of 3 or 4 with poor equipment, what happens to those other workers? In some regions, agricultural efficiency meant fewer jobs, more migration to cities. The steel plow also changed crop choices. Before effective plowing, farmers often worked around the prairie rather than through it, settled in timber areas where the soil was easier, focused on crops that didn't require deep tillage. With the steel plow, suddenly the richest soil was accessible, deep prairie loam, and that soil was perfect for grain crops, wheat, corn. These became the dominant crops of the Midwest, not just because of climate, but because the steel plow made large-scale grain farming practical. And grain, unlike vegetables or fruits, could be stored, shipped long distances, sold into commodity markets. That connection between prairie farms and distant markets, that's built on infrastructure, railroads, green elevators, commodity exchanges. But at the foundation of it all is the ability to efficiently work prairie soil, to turn grass into grain.
and that required steel plows. By the early 1900s, agricultural engineers were studying plow designs scientifically, testing different blade angles, different steel compositions, different surface treatments. What John Deere had figured out by intuition and experimentation, they were now quantifying with mathematics and material science. And the improvements kept coming. Gang plows that pulled multiple blades at once, disc plows that used rotating blades instead of fixed mold boards, specialized plows for different depths, different soil types, different purposes. John Deere and Company stayed at the forefront of these innovations. Not always, they had competitors, some of whom developed excellent equipment, but the John Deere name, that carried weight. Farmers trusted it, and that trust was built on decades of reliable performance. The company also got smart about something that seems obvious now but wasn't always then: service and parts. If a farmer bought a John Deere plow and something broke, worn share, bent moldboard, whatever, they needed to be able to get replacement parts quickly, reliably, affordably. John Deere built a dealer network that could provide that support. This wasn't charity, it was smart business. A farmer with a broken plow sitting in his shed isn't plowing, isn't making money, might buy a competitor's plow next time. But if that farmer can get his John Deere plow fixed quickly, reliably, affordably, he stays loyal to the brand. By 1910, 1915, the steel plow has become so ubiquitous, so standard, that it's hard to remember there was ever any other way to farm the prairie. The technology had become invisible, just part of how things worked. But underneath that invisibility was a revolution, a transformation of landscape, economy, and society that happened over 50, 60 years. And the tool that enabled it, the thing that started the whole cascade of changes, was a piece of shaped steel that let soil slide instead of stick.
So here's what's interesting when you look back at the whole story. The steel plow seems like such a simple thing. It's just a blade, a curved piece of steel. But that simple tool unlocked an entire region. The Midwest became America's agricultural heartland not because of climate alone, though that helped, not because of soil alone, though that mattered enormously. It became the heartland because someone figured out how to work that soil efficiently, how to turn potential into productivity. And that someone, John Deere, he wasn't a scientist, wasn't an engineer in the formal sense. He was a blacksmith who understood materials and who paid attention to a problem. The prairie defeats plows. Why? What's different about it? What would solve this? The answer was polish, was smoothness, was understanding that sticky soil needs nothing to grab onto, that friction is your enemy when you're trying to move earth. It's a lesson that echoes through industrial history. Sometimes the breakthrough isn't a complex system, it's a simple insight executed well, and then, critically, scaled up, made consistent, turned into a product that can be manufactured in volume and distributed widely. The steel plow transformed Midwestern agriculture, but John Deere and Company transformed manufacturing. The company built systems for quality control, for supply chain management, for dealer networks, for parts distribution, things we take for granted now, but were innovative then. And they did it because they had to. You can't build a business on a single brilliant invention if you can't deliver that invention consistently to customers who need it. Looking at modern agriculture, the steel plow seems almost quaint. Today's farms use TPS-guided tractors, precision seeders, computer-controlled harvesters. The technology has advanced beyond anything John Deere could have imagined. But the principles haven't changed. Understand your soil, use the right tool for the conditions, maintain your equipment, scale efficiently. These are still the fundamentals of successful farming. And if you look at a modern plow, assuming anyone still uses plows, they don't always, you'll see that same basic shape, that curve, that polished surface. The design language that John Deere established in 1837 is still there, just refined and adapted. The Midwestern landscape that the steel plow created, it's still with us. Driving through Iowa or Illinois or Nebraska, you see mile after mile of cropland, corn, soybeans, wheat. It looks natural now, looks like it's always been this way. But 180 years ago, it was grass, tall grass prairie, buffalo herds, native communities, a completely different world. Whether that change was good or bad depends on who you are, where you're standing. For farmers who built lives and families on prairie homesteads, the steel plow was a gift. For the ecosystems that were plowed under, for the communities that were displaced, the steel plow was something else.
History is like that. Technologies don't have simple moral values, they're tools, and tools can build or destroy depending on how they're used and who benefits. What's undeniable is the scale of change. The steel plow didn't just make farming easier, it made possible an entirely different kind of agriculture: industrial-scale grain production, commodity farming, the integration of rural producers into national and global markets. And all of that started with one blacksmith looking at a piece of broken saw blade and thinking, what if? That's maybe the real lesson here. Innovation often comes from unexpected places, from practical people solving immediate problems, not from grand plans or elaborate theories, but from observation, experimentation, and a willingness to try something different. John Deere shaped a piece of steel and changed a landscape. His company built an industry that still exists, still manufactures equipment, still carries his name nearly 200 years later. That's legacy. That's impact. And every time you eat bread or cereal or anything made with Midwestern grain, you're benefiting from a tool invented in 1837 by a blacksmith who just wanted to make a plow that worked better. The Prairie fought back against cast iron, but steel, smooth and self-scouring, turned the Prairie into farmland. And that farmland fed a nation, helped win wars, shaped American history. All because soil slides off steel better than it slides off iron. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest insights.